Hello and welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and we're joined today by two wonderful guests. We have Michael Russell MSP and Delyth Jewell, who's a member of the Welsh Assembly for Plaid Cymru. How are you both this morning?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent. It's great to have both of you. Now, we know we only have you for part of the show. We're going to be joined by Pilar Fernandez from Galicia later on, but we have both of you for the first half hour of the show. So let's just dive straight in. First of all, though, I do want to give a wee update on the state of play at the moment in Scotland. As of yesterday at 2 p.m, a total of 47,749 people in Scotland have been tested. 37,698 were negative. 10,051 tests were positive. 1,231 patients who tested positive have sadly died. 140 patients were in intensive care last night, and there were 1,748 people in total in Scottish hospitals, either confirmed or suspected to have the COVID-19 illness. So that's we will have obviously new figures a wee bit later on this afternoon, but that's the figures as they were at 2 p.m. yesterday. So first of all, Delyth, I'd like to come to you first because we were just saying before the show started that we hear very little about what's going on in Wales up here. So how is the state of play in Wales at the moment? How are things looking?
Well, things are, I wish that I could speak to you at a time when things were looking better in Wales. Obviously, there's nowhere in the world at the moment where things are looking particularly happy. But with the virus, there is a lot of frustration in Wales. I live in the part of Wales where the epicenter of the virus has been developing. And I think that there's a feeling that Wales seems to be at the back of the queue for most things. Our government seems to have followed the UK government in an awful lot of things. I don't know how much has been reported in Scotland on what happened with the testing deal that the Welsh government had secured with a company called Roche, and the UK government then basically gazumped that deal, and so we were left in a floundering. We didn't have the tests, so we were meant to be testing 8,000 people a day. Then the figures were revised downwards to 5,000. Then they were revised down to an even lower number. The Welsh government has now said they will not set a target for tests because they just know that no matter what target they set, I'm afraid that they're not going to reach that target. So it's not looking great at the moment in Wales. Obviously, everyone is working incredibly hard. It's difficult for everyone, but I think that there's a lot of frustration at the moment about the lack of transparency of decision making. Obviously, it's all emanating from the UK government, and as we've heard yesterday, Dominic Cummings seems to have more of a role in advising the UK government than anyone, it seems, representing Scotland or Wales.
Yeah, we will come to that in just a minute. But first of all, the First Ministers of Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland have all now published plans, or at least frameworks, on how to get out of this lockdown, how we might progress into something approaching more normal life. Now, Michael, England still doesn't have any sort of plan for this. Where does that leave the devolved nations, given that, for example, finances for the devolved nations are all determined by what gets spent in England?
Well, I mean, England has the 5 tests, which they've announced, and they're measuring their progress and what they want to do against those 5 tests. I think the difference in the devolved administrations is we've moved on from there to say, okay, we accept there are criteria, but what we need to do is to have a much broader look at that. And in Scotland's case, and I think quite correctly, and I think there's a lot of vision in this from the First Minister, to say we need to have an open discussion amongst ourselves as a nation, as citizens, about how we move ourselves forward. And that's the process we're now in. I don't think we should bog ourselves down on the difficulties of raising money or doing things differently. I think that will be a distraction from the conversation we need to have in Scotland at the present moment, which is around the document that's been published. And Nicholas talked about this document as being an iterative document, which is we'll add things to it, we'll move things on. My column today in the Sunday National, if I'm allowed to advertise that, on this channel deals with that and deals with what might lie beyond that, accepting that we have some very difficult times still ahead. You know, the lockdown has to continue. The social distancing is extremely important, but that we should also raise our eyes and say, what type of society do we want to live in, and how do we get to that society from where we are? Nicola said on Thursday, and she's absolutely right, that there is, you know, the old normal has gone. It's a new normal we're looking for, and that new normal has to involve people a lot more. It's got to be a green recovery, and we're talking about that already. I mentioned in my piece localism, and the fact that localism has come into its own in Scotland as a result of what's taken place, and we don't want to lose that. We want to build upon that, and we also need to say the old way of doing politics hasn't really worked very well for us, so we need to find a new way of doing politics. So there are things to look at and ways to move forward. You know, what England does will be up to England. They will have to choose how they do this. The four parts of the UK have the right and should have the right to decide themselves how they move forward. And indeed, you could turn this on its head to say that the First Minister would be in dereliction of her duty as the First Minister of Scotland if she was not looking at how Scotland should react to this, taking the best advice in Scotland as well as the best, you know, UK and international advice, and making decisions based on what is best for the people of Scotland. That's what she's there for.
Yeah, and Delyth, as you mentioned there, as Michael mentioned there, you know, the getting the best advice. As I said, you tweeted yesterday about Dominic Cummings being a member of the SAGE committee, apparently, while the chief medical officers of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are only members of that as observers. And clearly that the devolved nations don't have the capacity to have the kind of scientific committees, that kind of expertise available as standard. Obviously, there are people that they can consult, but that centralized advice has not been directly available to the devolved nations to contribute to. How big a difference do you think that's made to the response from the devolved nations?
Well, I think it will have inevitably had a big impact on that. And as I've already said, I think that there's a feeling that we are constantly playing catch up. I've heard from one of the local health boards to me that on a number of occasions that they've been waiting for UK government advice to change so that they can put into action changes, for example, with the availability of PPE and how often staff can wear PPE. They've been waiting for a change in the UK government advice, which probably wasn't changing quickly enough for some of the hardest hit areas. So I think that obviously after all of this is over, there are going to be a number of questions that have to be answered. We can't wait years for an inquiry into what's gone wrong. But I would say that I'm really impressed by the document that the Scottish Government has published. I'm very glad that the Welsh Government has published a similar document, although it is around half the length and it doesn't have the same rigour in referring to independent advice. But I agree with what Mike was saying, that this crisis that we're in at the moment, obviously we have to be focusing on the immediate concerns, on saving lives. That has to be the focus. But we are also going to be looking at the kind of society that's going to be emerging from this crisis. And it probably isn't right to speak about it in terms of the opportunities that are afforded by the crisis, but inevitably, because we are going to come out of this as a changed society, I think that there are things that we can learn. For example, how we value or don't value certain jobs in society that are keeping us alive at the moment. So I think that there are causes to be optimistic about what will happen as a result of this and the lessons that we'll learn. But I know I'm straying away from what you've asked me here in terms of the impact that I think it's had on the devolved administration. So much is being affected by what is right for not just England, but probably London. I think that there are lots of other parts of England that are missing out because of the London-centric nature of the UK media. And I think that really we're seeing increasingly a pressure from some sections of the media that we need to come out of lockdown early, and none of the advice seems to support that. So I'm really concerned at the moment about who actually is in charge, and if Dominic Cummings is playing a part in the scientific advisory group. Well, he was apparently one of the people who was really keen to push for herd immunity at the beginning of this crisis. I have no confidence in his ability to actually follow what is right for saving people's lives.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I do just want to point out, you may just have seen appear on your screen a wee tweet from our good friend Chris McCusker. If you want to join in the conversation, you can do that on Twitter using the hashtag #FoolScottish. But to come back to you, Mike, we've seen Jackson Carlaw, for example, leader of the Scottish Tories, urging the First Minister to stay in lockstep with England. Now, clearly, that doesn't make sense. As you've both said, you have to the First Ministers of the devolved nations have to do what's best for their own nations. If England were to lift their lockdown far too soon, if England were to get rid of all the restrictions all of a sudden, it wouldn't make sense for Scotland to do the same. What's your feeling about that kind of thought process, though? Is there just something about Toryism that says you can't have different people doing different things?
Well, it wasn't just Toryism. I mean, Richard Leonard, the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, I always want to remind people who Richard Leonard actually is. Richard Leonard was arguing that there must be exactly the same, not just vaguely the same, exactly the same process in North Berwick as in Berwick-on-Tweed. Now, this is foolish. I mean, health is devolved. There's a huge range of devolved powers. The First Minister's responsibility is to make sure that things are done properly in Scotland. So she must have account of what the Scottish advice is. And if the Scottish advice is do not do this or do it in a different way, she has to be dereliction of duty not to pay attention to it. I mean, just to go back to the Dominic Cummings stuff. I mean, I wouldn't pay Dominic Cummings to tell me whether the sky was blue or not, but that's not the issue. The issue really is, first of all, should there be people who are special advisors on key scientific groups? And I think the answer is probably no. There may be special circumstances in which an official representing the Prime Minister should be at that group, but certainly not as a member, somebody perhaps to hear what is being said and to carry that back to the Prime Minister. But, the real issue for me in here is not only Dominic Cummings, it is the fact that the chief medical officers and the chief scientists of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland sit and listen to that and have to put questions in writing. That tells you the nature of the United Kingdom. Now, I'm used to this, in what I do in Brexit. We've seen again this week. We've had a disastrous round of negotiations, which it's absolutely clear from what Monsieur Barnier has been saying was deeply frustrating for the EU. We've seen a very arrogant account of it by an official who's completely out of control. David Frost, as the chief negotiator, doesn't report to anybody as far as I can see, certainly doesn't tell Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland what is happening. But that is the nature of the UK, and that is the type of thing we need to get away from. Because if you have the chief scientific advisor from Scotland and Wales and the chief medical officer from Scotland and Wales, and they are sitting there and Dominic Cummings is talking, and all they can do is write down a question for sending in next week, that's not right. That's absolutely not right. Now, we have been trying very hard during this process, and I want to stress it, to work with everybody and to work with everybody as closely as we possibly can. And we'll go on doing that because it is right that we do so. But in working with other people, you do not give up the right of initiative yourself. You still have the right of initiative. You can be as collaborative and as helpful as possible, and you should be in the middle of a crisis. But you should also recognize each other as equals, and that is not happening, and that needs to change. And that is, of course, is at the heart of the problem we confront every day. The reality is you can only operate as equals if you operate as independent countries. That's the only way you can do it.
Mm-hmm. Delyth, the First Minister here has had quite a lot of praise, in fairness, from all sectors for how well she's handled this, how well she's communicated with people, and so on.
Yeah.
What has the reaction been like from people the people and the media in Wales towards the whole crisis, really?
Well, I'm sure that your viewers in Scotland and anyone listening will be familiar with the fact that in Wales, or maybe they won't be, the fact that is in Wales, we don't have a particularly strong independent media. So the vast majority of people in Wales will get their news from the more London-centric UK press. But anyone who, there have been two major stories from Wales that have got UK-wide attention. The first one was when there were goats in Llandudno who had there were mountain goats that had gone into the town because people were in lockdown, and very amusing, but there was that. And then a few days ago, one of the ministers in the Welsh Government, during a virtual session of the Senedd, had not put his microphone on mute, and it picked up some unpleasant remarks he was saying. Now, it says so much about the fact that the media that covers Wales, obviously the Welsh media have been focusing on other stories, but we in Wales seem to only really feature when there's some kind of blooper or a nice, amusing story. And usually, I mean, this is something that obviously I'm always concerned about, because I care about the public life of the people of Wales, and I want people to be informed about decisions that affect their lives. Usually, when you see a press conference from Downing Street referring to what's happening in England as though it pertained to the whole of the UK, it's usually very frustrating. It's actually dangerous in the time of a pandemic for incorrect information to be gleaned by people, because it's not clear that the information being given out is actually only relating to England. And I think that, yeah, as Mike's been saying, there are inevitably frustrations now which are being felt about the fact that, by unionists, on the fact that actually the UK government doesn't seem to recognise the union as that important as they've been saying in recent months with the Brexit negotiations. The First Minister of Wales has said that as we come out of lockdown, whenever that is, that it should be strengthening a four-nation approach. Downing Street has said they don't recognise what Mr. Drakeford has been talking about with that. So I think that obviously it is in everyone's interests in lots of ways for there to be collaboration. The governments should be working together, and it is, and to be fair to the Welsh Government, to the First Minister of Wales, I'm sure he has been trying his very hardest to make sure that collaboration does happen, but Downing Street just doesn't seem to consider, certainly Wales and probably to a lesser extent Scotland, we're more of an afterthought. And again, normally that's very frustrating. I think it can actually be dangerous in a time like this.
Yeah. What's your, I mean, obviously, as you say, Wales doesn't have quite the same media apparatus that Scotland has. So what's been your feeling about the way the UK-wide or the London-centric media has responded to this? There's been, we've seen headlines like Boris's health is the health of the nation and things like that. What do you make of the way that the media in general has responded?
Well, I think there's going to be a big distinction between different types of newspapers and different certainly with the print media. I've obviously, I mean, if you compare the thing which most concerns me is the way in which the identities of the people who've passed away with this virus are not being given the same respect, almost as if when we've seen terrorist atrocities, that it's very normal for the newspapers the following day to have the front page to be photographs of the people who've died. Every single day, there are hundreds of people dying, and we don't hear very much at all about who those people are. I think that to a certain extent, it's probably going to be a horrible inevitability that the media and public consciousness becomes, deadened is a very unfortunate phrase, but it becomes more numbed to the identities and to the individual tragedies as more and more people pass away. I think it is vitally important that we don't lose a sense of the tragedies, of the fact that these people who are dying, they're not just numbers, they are individual lives, and many of them may not have died if the UK government had acted more quickly. And I think that I'm frustrated at the moment with how there are sections of the media, not all sections of the media, but there are some sections of the media who seem to be trying to cause a stir and saying that we should come out of lockdown more quickly than we probably should. I'm by no means an expert in this, but the scientists who are experts seem to be saying, and also the health boards in my area are telling me that if we come out of lockdown now, they may well not be able to cope in their ICU. So I think that the media, even more so now than ever, has a responsibility to be sensible and to relay information in a way that isn't going to cause panic or really terribly unfortunate behaviour from members of the public. So, I mean, I think, obviously the press are going to want new stories, and it must be very frustrating at the moment that there is only really one story in town. But I think that there are some parts of the media at the moment that are reporting things in a way that I don't think are very helpful. And they could be dangerous.
Yeah. And Michael, here in Scotland, I mean, obviously, we don't want to lump all the media together. For example, the Sunday Times last week did that excellent report that I think really changed a lot of people's attitudes to what's been going on in the Westminster government. But then this week, we also saw one newspaper in Scotland basically looking for a headline saying Nicola cancels Christmas. What's been your feeling about the way the media has responded to this?
I mean, Delyth is right to say there are different types of media and they have different levels of responsibility. We're going to have to reflect long and hard about how the media has been affected by this. Some of them will not survive too. I mean, there's real fear and worry, particularly in the local press, and some really worrying signs of things that are taking on. The West Highland Free Press, which has been one of the campaigning local newspapers of Scotland. I may have had my disagreements with them. I have had my disagreements with them, but I'm not happy to see them, for example, ceasing physical publication, from now until June and operating only online. I know in my own area where there are newspapers, I've been in touch with 3 of the major local newspapers in my very large area, Invercargill and Butte, this very week who've got severe problems. So we're going to have to see how they come out of it. We're also going to have to reflect upon 24-hour news cycles in a pandemic. It is the first global event like this in which we've had 24-hour news cycles, and social media is a major player. There have been good and bad things in that. I tend not to take a very short-term view of the media. Journalists come and go, newspapers come and go, programs come and go. If you look, you talked about the health of Boris as the health of the nation. I do not read the Telegraph because I do not believe that the Telegraph represents your point of view I'm particularly interested in or want to know about. So the Telegraph can publish what it wishes. It's a free world. But people may not buy it because they may say, "Hang on a minute, that's complete nonsense." So I'm relaxed about it to that extent. I think there are lots of questions about how the media operates in Scotland that need analysis and discussion, and maybe we've been too willing not to have that discussion, and we probably need to have it at some stage. And it will be about ensuring that there is a healthy free press in Scotland that can operate as it wishes to do, including say whatever it wants and however critically it wants to be, and even publish ludicrous headlines like Nicola cancels Christmas. Well, I've seen ludicrous headlines in the press before. I'll see them again no doubt.
Yeah. Now, I do want to look a wee bit towards the future with a wee bit of hope. Now, we've seen throughout history that kind of major disruptive events like this can lead to significant changes in the world. The World War II kind of leading us into the NHS, for example, is maybe the biggest example. Do you see the likelihood of anything like that happening here? I'm thinking particularly, we spoke to Alison Pollock last week, who talked about the need for a combined health and social care system. And also this week we spoke to Ronnie Cowan about the proposal for a UBI that the SNP and Plaid MPs have supported. Delyth, coming to you first, do you see that any of that sort of thing changing in the immediate aftermath of all this?
I see an opportunity and I see a hope for that, but I don't see it as an inevitability, and that is as a challenge, because I think I've certainly read lots of people writing about this phenomenon that after, much more recently than the Second World War, after the financial crisis in 2008, there was an opportunity for some things to change, but most of those things didn't actually come to pass. So I think that there are some things that have to change surely after this pandemic, in terms of how we structure society, in terms of as I said earlier, the types of jobs that we actually value in society. I mean, carers are finally, we're clapping them in the streets, but we still don't pay them properly. And they're doing one of the most important jobs anyone could possibly do. But why has it taken a pandemic like this for us to actually realize that, and we have to actually act on that realization. So I think that they are, and also in terms of climate change, we are seeing, the waters are far less polluted, that the skies are less polluted. Obviously, they are things that we have to actually take with us and learn and try to rebuild a new society from whatever comes at the end of this crisis. And that has to start now. We can't just wait until the crisis is over. But I think that for the talk of what could change, we need to be very alive to the fact that it isn't inevitable that those changes happen. We have to fight for those changes, because there will be people who want things to go back to exactly as they were before.
Yeah, and coming to you now, Michael. Obviously, Scotland has begun the process of trying to combine its health and social care systems. It's been quite a long and at times quite difficult process, but that process is happening here. What else do you think can come out of this, and where is the Scottish Government looking to make changes as we come out of this crisis?
Well, I think you've got two levels of this. You've got policy changes. I mean, health and social care integration is something where, has taken place in Scotland, but, there's a lot more work to be done on it. And, this does indicate the need for continued change in there. And there are other areas of policy. Universal basic income is clearly one which needs to be examined again. But I think much more importantly is the type of thing Delyth is talking about. That is the different type of society. If you look at, we've had a society in the UK based upon austerity for the last, since the recession. That clearly has led to some of the problems which we are now facing. A decline in public services because of constant cutting, is something that we must recognise, and no doubt this will be further debated. But at least in the First Minister's paper, the fact that austerity has been, a major problem. So we need to say that's not how we order things. That's not how we should order things, and we need to look at that again. But the very widest anticipation is, if we want it, and if we will it, we can have a different society. It is the old normal and the new normal. We can't go back to the old normal. That's not going to happen. So how do we get to the new normal? Not just in the key things we've got to keep doing for a period of time, like social distancing, at the present moment, like maintaining the lockdown, making sure that we're doing everything we can to suppress in the long term the virus, and then the type of society we have. And starting on that by saying to people, what do you think? What do you think it should look like? How do you think we should move forward? What should society be like? Will be part of the process that we're going to go through with the type of thing that Nicola started with on Thursday, and then takes it further forward. But we've got to want it. We've got to will it to happen, and then we've got to make sure that we, as a society, say this is how it's going to be. And it's not going to be the type of society we've lived in up until now. It is going to be a society which we have made out of this tragedy. In order that we can move forward. Now, we've seen, First World War, a land fit for heroes to live in. It didn't happen. It didn't happen in the way that people wanted it to happen. We've got to, as politicians, make it happen in the way that people want it to happen. And that's going to be a very big challenge indeed. But we've got to have a shot at it. We've got elections due in Scotland. We've got to look at this together and see how we can take it forward. I mean, I hesitate to come back to my obsession of Brexit again. But, people of Scotland didn't vote for that. And are we honestly saying now, well, it doesn't really matter, because we'll allow it to be done in a time where there's no bandwidth for it in this country or in the EU? We'll allow it to be imposed upon us with no scrutiny? No. That's the type of politics that we should absolutely reject. And we should make it clear that we reject that type of politics. So I'm hopeful, actually. I'm hopeful that this can be done. I think that, lockdown has changed a lot of things. It'll only happen if we make it happen. And we work together to make it happen. And that means throwing away some of our preconceived notions.
Mm-hmm. Well, you read my mind there, Michael, because I did want to ask you a wee bit about Brexit just before you went. So I'm glad you managed to get that in. I realise now we are just coming to the end of the time that we have with you. So I do want to thank both of you very much. Michael, we've had you on a few times, and you're always welcome. Delyth, I hope we can have you back again sometime soon. But thank you very much to both of you, and do take care of yourselves and those around you. And we'll talk to you again soon.
In a week in which you've been the subject of the news yourselves, start your elbowing and keep going. The more questions you get to ask at press conferences, the happier we'll all be. Well,
thank you very much, Michael. We're trying our best.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And just while we're trying to get Pilar connected, I just want to say one thing that the personal from me. I had a Facebook memory popped up this morning. Today is the 4th anniversary of me getting my cancer diagnosis. And it just reminded me, this week the Scottish Government started this NHS is open campaign to remind people that the NHS is still open for business. If you have a lump or a bump, if you are feeling ill, if you've got some sort of problem, then the NHS is still there. And the NHS is there to help. When we talk about protect the NHS, we're not talking about protecting the NHS from you. It's about protecting the NHS for you. It's so that we're not finding the NHS overwhelmed and unable to cope with people who have urgent cancer issues or heart attacks, strokes, all of these kinds of things. GPs are still open. The 111 line is still open. 999 is still open. Hospitals are still open and treating other illnesses. So if you are having any sort of problem, please do go. There's some things that if you wait, then they become significantly worse. Cancer obviously is the most obvious one of those. It can become a much, much bigger problem. I was very lucky. My surgery went very well. I've had no hint of a relapse. But if I'd waited, if I'd thought, I don't want to bother the NHS just now, there's every chance it would have spread to my lungs and I'd be dead by now. So please, if you have any concerns like that, please do go and speak to your GP. They're all still active, and they are there to help. So if you do have a problem, please do think about that. But I do think that we do now have Pilar Fernandez on the line. Pilar joining us from Galicia. Pilar, how are you doing today?
Hello, everyone at home. Hello. I'm fine. Thank you very much.
And first of all, I mean, obviously, we've seen pictures and stories from Spain over the last few weeks. It seemed like just an absolute horror show. But it does seem that Spain has started to improve a little bit. How have things been, and how are things looking just now?
Well, yes, we've been in a very, very horrible situation with thousands of people dying, with a lack of organization. There was a chaos because there was the situation was under control. It was not under control. Now we are starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Today, children can go out and play as long as they observe social distancing for an hour. And apparently, we could go out for a walk or to do some sport next week. So the situation is now much, much better, although we have the very bad figure, 23,000 people died because of the coronavirus. Infected cows, there's thousands of infected cases. But now it's getting better now, slowly, but it's getting better.
Yeah. And does it feel like are people in Spain now kind of quite happy to have some of these restrictions lifted, or are people still quite nervous to think about going outside?
This is going to be very interesting. First of all, because when you have to respect the lockdown in a society like the Spanish, that we are so happy breaking the rules, and we are having a kind of life, a very social life, all together, playing together, kissing, hugging, etc. This lockdown has been very, very tough. In a mental level, it's going to be interesting because we are having problems with health, mental health attention. But amazingly, the Spanish society has acted in a very powerful way, respecting the lockdown. It's been amazing. I'm amazed at the way that we have respected the lockdown, Kenny. Obviously, it's going to the next step is going to be tough for many people because fear is present since the beginning of this pandemic. And in a human level, in an emotional level, it's going to be very complicated to handle emotions. But let's see. We're hopefully improving this situation, and we will get through this, hopefully.
Now, I don't know if you heard us talking with Delyth and Michael about the media. I wonder, what has the response of the media in Spain been like? First of all, to the crisis in Spain, but also to the crisis in the UK and around the rest of Europe. How has the media in Spain been reacting to this?
Well, awful. I have to say it has been awful. Especially here in Galicia, we are having a problem with the Galician television because of the particular situation when we are living under a state of emergency. The powers, the control is being centralized. So the Spanish government is taking all the decisions in collaboration with the both administrations and the autonomies. You have to understand that the vast country, Galicia, not so sure, but Catalonia, we're about to have local elections. So we were in the middle of an electoral campaign. And here in Galicia, with the Popular Party in power for 10 years, 11 years now, the control of the Galician television is just disgraceful. Also, 2 days before the emergency, the health emergency has been called for the president of the Xunta de Galicia, the media, the friendly media, received 2 million euros in subsidies. So it's just disgusting the way that the government, some governments, especially some governments, are giving subsidies and money, public money to some media. Apart from that, we are looking at, we're facing the extreme right attacks in all social networks. Thousands of millions spending organizations from the far right spending millions of euros trying to spread the word and spread fake news, attacking the Spanish government. So the media, there's very, very few media, newspapers or televisions that they are informing in a proper way. The Spanish government has been criticized for anything. Every little step that the Spanish government is doing, which is common sense in this situation, has been criticized by the far right and the far right media. So we have a problem. We have a very, very serious problem. Journalists need to reflect on this situation because we need proper media. We need media that report on the voices of those who are having problems with this, because we need to improve the way that the society in general is working, but also the way that or health personnel or the teachers or all the levels of the society have been suffering cuts and austerity policies. And this pandemic has shown up all the dirty policies from conservative governments. We need a proper debate. We need criticism, constructive criticism. And that's the role of the media from my point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we've seen in the United States this week some pretty substantial protests. People saying, lift the lockdown, it's evil, it's communism, it's a dictatorship, all these kind of things. Has there been anything like that in Spain, or have people generally accepted that the lockdown is the right thing to do?
Well, if you remember in Spain, the far-right press and the far-right organization like Vox or the extreme right like Popular Party were trying to toxic the debate with Catalonia. So the entire argumentary from the extreme right parties were about Catalonia and tried to create a conflict between different parts of the state. Now the Catalonia case has been stopped and the debate has to stop because of this pandemic. And they have started a new strategy to create confusion on terms of the conditions of the lockdown, the necessity of the lockdown, the way that the Spanish government is facing this lockdown and is taking decisions. Obviously, we can debate on if this lockdown Spain has the most strict lockdown in all Europe, or at least one of the most strict lockdowns. But we can debate on the conditions, because we say, for example, that you can go for a walk or you can do some sports by respecting the social distancing, etc. But it was not the case in Spain or in other countries, in other places, because of the characteristics of the society, I'm afraid, and also because the alert for this pandemic arrived very late. So it was necessary, this lockdown. It was necessary to control the situation and then prepare ourselves for the next wave of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Yes, obviously we can criticize some terms of the lockdown. We could do better in other conditions, but there's the voices against the lockdown and the conditions of the lockdown has been basically from the extreme right. The other thing in Spain is in terms of rights, civil rights and human rights. And if you remember, Spain has a gagging law that is very dangerous in terms of freedom of speech. With the new government, we need to change that, but there is still there, the gagging law. So from left parties have been pointed at this situation, the gagging law has to be scrapped.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned a little bit about, for example, the elections that have been affected. How has the regional differences in Spain affected this whole crisis? I mean, obviously we know that there has been long-standing and quite serious tension between Madrid and Catalonia, for example. We've seen a lot of that over the last few years. But there's quite a lot of power in a number of autonomous communities in Spain. How big is that tension now with regard to how the lockdown is being managed?
This pandemic, as well as in Scotland or Wales, has been shown up that the limitations of the devolution, the devolved powers, and the limitations of devolution, and the differences between autonomies. And the tension, well, yes, there has been a little bit of political dancing, but in general, the message has been all together. Let's act all together. Because of this particular reality that the Galician and the Basque and the Catalan elections, local elections, will take place once the pandemic is controlled, you can see, for example, here in Galicia, the president of the Xunta de Galicia acting like a dictator in terms of appearance in the television or the friendly press, and the message sent to the Prime Minister, the President of Spain, Pedro Sánchez. Pedro Sánchez, I have to say, has been very patient, trying to spread the word in a very respectful way. They have tried to conciliate differences between autonomies, which is not easy in this moment. At this moment, in terms of the Catalonia case, the Catalan government has been acting pretty well, by respecting the indications from the Spanish government, central government, also the Basque Country, but always, and it's important to do so, they have been pointed at the importance of respecting the powers of the devolution, and also have been calling for more powers, of course, because the limitations of the central government to handle, for example, health services is none. They can give the indication, but they cannot handle the situation locally, so they need the devolution administrations. But in general, I think we've been handling this very peacefully. Now that we can see the end at the end of the tunnel, things are changing, and I'm sure that it's going to be more polemic in every little statement from the different autonomies.
Yeah, and as you do start to come out of lockdown, we talked a little bit there with Mike and Delyth about this as well, about moving into a different kind of future. Has there been much talk about that kind of thing in Spain, about what changes need to be made to society generally going forward?
Yes. Obviously, the austerity policies run by conservative parties, all the cuts, all the privatizations, the awful reality of the care homes, and most of the deaths are from care homes because they have been privatized by the Popular Party. For example, here in Galicia, it's terrible, the conditions of the care homes. Or in Catalonia, because if you remember, the Catalonia have had a conservative government, a conservative government for many years. So these austerity policies have been run in Catalonia for a conservative party, Convergencia y Unión. This pandemic has changed everything, has changed our mentality, has changed our behavior. A simple thing like washing your hands very often, is now part of our life. Try to be aware that you can be a focus of contagious. It's very important because you have to take your own responsibility with yourself and with the loved ones. The reality of grandmas, grandpas, the reality of the more vulnerable population, the importance of having a public universal health service with no intervention from the businessmen. the reality that we need social policies to protect the most vulnerable people and also the majority of the society. We are living in a place that we need to be aware of air pollution and the ecology, and we need to try to look after our planet. So in many ways, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And we've been speaking on social networks, we've been speaking about liberties, freedom, we've been debating about the reality of these austerity policies since the beginning of the last crisis we faced. Everything has changed, everything needs to change, everything we have changed, and we need to be aware of that. We need to change our behavior, Kenny.
Yeah. Now, we talked about going into the future. Clearly, every country that's been affected by this, which is pretty much every country in the world now, has taken a huge economic impact as a result of it. How is the economics of Spain? And looking into the summer, for example, when I doubt there are going to be any tourists coming from Britain, which tourists coming from all over Europe to go to Spain. It's a huge tourist destination. It's a big part of the economy. How is the economic rebuilding? How are the politicians talking about that?
Well, we are starting to speak about that de-escalation and the measures to apply in near future. Obviously, there's a lot of incognites at the moment because it's going to be tough. For example, here in Galicia, if you know about the Camino de Santiago and all the tourists businesses are suffering, we're going to suffer very, very heavily. Also in Andalusia, for example, the Canaries, everything has to be analyzed with a lot of detail, and it's going to be tough. The most important thing is the reaction from Europe. As Pedro Sanchez said, the president of Spain said, now it's time for Europe to show that the European Union is about solidarity and is about to rescue population, the people, the majority of the people, and not to act like in 2012 when the economical crisis started and they rescued the banks. So in this particular case, the European Union was facing Brexit, but now the most important thing is if Europe is not able to give response to this pandemic, economical crisis and the social crisis we're facing, the European Union will be in serious danger. So I think from different governments, this is quite clear. Portugal, Italy, France have been speaking out very, very loudly. Spain has made the case very, very very, very loudly too. And the problem was, the problem was Netherlands. The Netherlands and Sweden, for example, they were complaining about the way that the different solutions was trying to introduce by the European Union. So let's see what happened with the European Union. The essential solution is going to be from the European Union. And then here we have to handle, for example, the self-employed is now a disaster. The Spanish government has decided to solve this situation with subsidies or social subsidies, a universal salary to try to help the more vulnerable people in the society. But still now, we have to give a debate, a deep debate on the kind of economy we need and the kind of society we need. And in terms of economy, this is going to be a very important and very tough one.
Yeah, on that note about the EU, obviously the European Central Bank has restrictions on how it will help support countries that are in financial difficulty, but clearly every country in Europe is in some degree of difficulty as a result of this. Is there any sense from people in Spain or from the politicians in Spain that this is something where the EU is maybe less popular than it was?
Well, yes. Here, the European Union was very unpopular, especially after the way that the European Union acted during the crisis in 2012, and also because they were rescuing banks, they were not rescuing people. And the level of popularity with the European Union was crazy. It was is very low. But after Brexit, people understood that the way the Brexit was decided and the way the problems that Brexit were causing, the most important thing was for the European Union to change the measures, to change the policies, to change the view of the entire Europe, because they were failing. And Brexit is a very important lesson to be learned for every one of us. Now people were complaining because of the statements from Germany, statements from Germany, Netherlands, okay? And yes, there was a big debate or discussion about the European Union being in danger. But let's see, because it's very, very early to analyze in which place is going to be the European Union in 1 year ahead. So the level of popularity is low now, but it's not so low as used to be, okay? And depending on how the European Union is going to act in this pandemic, we'll see the reaction from the population.
Yeah. Well, Pilar, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. I'm afraid we are out of time now, though. So do take care of yourself and all the people around you. We will hopefully talk to you again very soon. Thanks a lot.
You too. Take care. Stay at home. Be happy, and we will get through this. Okay.
We certainly hope so. Thank you, Pilar. And that is just about all we've got time for today. So I'd like to thank all of our guests, Pilar Fernandez, obviously, and earlier we were talking to Michael Russell MSP and Delyth Jewell AM from Plaid Cymru in Wales. It's always a pleasure to have three such excellent guests. We'd like to thank you for joining us as well. If you are able to support Broadcasting Scotland, we would love to have that support. If you're able to, please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter there, and your £5 a month can make a huge difference to what we're able to do here at Broadcasting Scotland in terms of the quantity, the quality, and the type of programmes that we can produce. If you're not able to, please don't feel bad about it. We do understand that, especially right now, a lot of people's incomes are really, really stretched. So you can still help us, though. If you follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, if you find us on Facebook as well, just search Broadcasting Scotland, we'll pop right up. And then share the programmes with your friends, your family, whoever you want. Let them know why you watch Broadcasting Scotland, what you get out of the programme, why you think Broadcasting Scotland's important. You're our marketing team. You're our biggest asset in that sense. You're the people that get other people to watch. And growing our audience is always going to help us to attract more money and to be able to develop more shows, better shows for you. So if you're able to do that, please do. And if you would like to get involved in Broadcasting Scotland in any way, whether that's as a journalist, whether it's doing work behind the camera or in front of the camera, there's always work to be done. So do please get in touch with us if you're interested in that in any way. There's always lots to be done and always jobs to be filled. But that is all we've got time for today. We will be back again tomorrow at 7. Gordon will be back with Scotland at 7 as usual. I'll be back on Tuesday as for my regular slot. But until then, it is a beautiful day. So if you are going out for your daily sanctioned exercise or to get to the shops for your essential items, then do please enjoy the sunshine while you can. Other than that, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.